What's going on, everyone? I've said it before and I'll say it again, but 2020 was an insanely underrated year for Kanye lore. I already talked about Nah Nah Nah, and while I was researching and reminiscing for that video, I got reminded about WESTDAYEVER. So now let's look back on that and everything that did and didn't come from it. Alright, WESTDAYEVER happened in 2020, but you can trace its roots back 2 years earlier to 2018. June of that year was Kanye's big comeback, and in April he would announce it by doing a very straightforward info dump of every album he was working on, when they were dropping, and also the reveal of Yeezy slides, all back to back. Like I said, this wasn't officially WESTDAYEVER, but you can tell Kanye really liked the response this communication method got, and it clearly carried over to 2020. Short bursts of information on Twitter, simple and to the point, and announcements that were bound to go viral. He even spun back a few days later to announce that he was working on Nas's album, and just like the others, that also blew up the internet. It really was a great way to build his comeback, but anyway, back to 2020. On June 26th of that year, Kanye would once again reappear on Twitter with the hashtag WESTDAYEVER, followed by a list of what that entails. All at once, we got Yeezy Gap, Moala being a part of Yeezy Gap, a Kids See Ghosts series, the Jesus is King film coming to Apple TV, fun fact by the way, that didn't happen, a documentary about the then new Yeezy site redesign, the foamrunners being released, a new version of Jesus is King with Dr. Dre, and lastly, Wash Us in the Blood. We're going to go through all of these to explain and look back on these announcements and see what kind of impact they would have or what they would spiral into. Starting off with Yeezy, this is a pretty easy one. The first thing we got was Nick Knight talking about the work he did designing yeezysupply.com. Kanye claimed it was a documentary. No. This thing is barely a YouTube video. It's only 8 minutes long and the audio is prime 2020 Zoom quality. To say this is a documentary is a giant stretch, but for what it's worth, I do think it's a bit fascinating. This was for sure one of the things that got overlooked that day, and for good reason, but if you're into design and kinda like prototype development stuff, I recommend you watch it. In my opinion, the site looked kinda ugly, not gonna lie, but the Wyoming era aesthetic and the process behind it was always really unique to me in spite of how bad everything but the shoes from that era looked. Experimentation in everything, but especially web design, is dead now, so I can respect them for wanting to take a risk and make something different. And like most things from that era, yeezysupply.com doesn't exist anymore. Kanye Vaporware is the best vaporware. Things that probably cost millions to make will only be up for like a year and barely used. Gotta love it. And then of course the foamrunners, the legendary foamrunners, excuse me. After being shown in 2019, WESTDAYEVER would be the official release for them, and for a while there, these were huge shoes, literally and figuratively. They had their time in the spotlight, but in usual Yeezy fashion, they were hated, got popular, copied, Kanye gets in controversy, and then everyone forgets they exist. Tell me I'm wrong, because I'm not. Yeezy Gap. Technically this is still the other chapter, but there's so much here I wanted to separate them, and Yeezy Gap was kinda its own thing outside of mainline Yeezy stuff, so it just felt right. Kanye and Gap go pretty far back. They almost worked together many times before with Pastel and the Yeezy merch, and most notably, Kanye worked at a Gap store, which he talked about on Spaceship. So when the collab got announced, it was a very cool full circle kind of moment. This was pretty big because in case you didn't know or anything, Gap is kinda dead. So for them to collab with Yeezy, it made the stock surge and people were very hopeful that he would revive this brand the same way he revived Adidas years earlier. But since it was 2020, that didn't happen. Yeezy Gap was almost immediately brought down due to Kanye's wackiness. First it was his run for president, then it was his crash out about contracts and the amount of input that he has in his business deals. From that point, the amount of tension in the partnership would always be high. Kanye was out of control, but Gap needed him so bad they would time after time hold their breath and just hope that this would pay off for them. And it did. We would get our first look at Yeezy Gap in June of 2021. These projections of the blue puffer hoodie would show up in a few cities. Then in July we saw that same hoodie in red at the iconic Donda listening party. In September their second hoodie would drop, and similar to the foamrunners and a lot of what Ye makes, it was criticized but sold incredibly well. The music video for Heaven and Hell, which is basically a Yeezy Gap ad, made them $14 million just for this basic hoodie. It was going very well. So let's enter 2022. As you may know, this was not a good year. It was like the moment it hit January 1st, Kanye wanted to tear down every wall he just rebuilt from 2020. In what I think was kind of a silly decision, they would launch Yeezy Gap engineered by Balenciaga around the same time Donda 2 was happening. The pieces weren't bad, but I just think the amount of brands here don't work. Balenciaga is so in its own lane, and pairing it with Gap of all brands sounds like a joke. Price wise, it was also a huge shift. We went from moderately priced $90 hoodies to $200 hoodies and $500 padded jackets. Keep in mind, Yeezy Gap was supposed to be the affordable Yeezy, but instead it just became the same shit. A second drop would hit in May with a bit more backlash because the price was even higher now, and the whole identity that this partnership had originally was gone. The bright colors and minimal design were done. This was full-blown Balenciaga madness. By summer, the walls started coming down. The line would be introduced in stores where it both didn't sell super well and got into controversy for selling the clothes out of trash bags. The CEO of Gap would be fired because of the underperformance, but Kanye did not care. He didn't see the brand struggle as his responsibility. From here, we enter the very short-lived Yeezy Shades era. These got teased in the summer of 2022, but simultaneously Kanye is ranting about the deal yet again, things not being done his way, things being done behind his back. The relationship between them is basically doomed at this point, because Gap's patience, which Ye had been testing for years, was gone.
We canceled the pre-order of the blue jacket. That's insane. I got 3 million emails over from Adidas, and we didn't use them. That's insane. That's insane. We sold 14 million hoodies at $80 with no logo on it off of one commercial and never ran the commercial again. That's insane.
On September 12th, Ye does an interview with Bloomberg stating that he wants out of both his Adidas and Gap deals, and 3 days later, Ye walks from Gap, terminating what was supposed to be a 10-year contract. In October, he would premiere Yeezy Season 9, which was the end of his career essentially. In fact, to make another full circle, the WESTDAYEVER, which was named after that day, was shut down because of Yeezy Season 9. So you can see just how turbulent those 2 years were. And my take on the deal as a whole is sort of nuanced. Obviously, Kanye is not an easy person to work with, but it's because of that and the long history of him fighting anybody who works with him that I pass some of the blame onto Gap as well. You are collaborating with one of the most unfocused creatives ever. Everything he announced but your partnership didn't get off the ground, and you thought a 10-year deal would go smoothly. I get Gap was desperate and there was a lot of potential, but I think they were being blissfully ignorant. This man literally started his fashion career fighting Nike, and you thought he would work with you. But for what it's worth, things could have been way worse. The line actually did make clothes, which is a surprise by Kanye standards, and his vow to make cheaper products once he went independent did happen, which was nice. He fumbled that too, obviously. But on to the one I was the most excited for, Kids See Ghosts animated series. This album was my favorite back in 2019. I loved everything about it, but in particular, the art. so a full show of it I thought was a slam dunk. There were some warning signs. Number 1, what the hell would the show be about? Number 2, who's paying for it? But that wasn't anything for me to worry about. Kanye, Cudi, and Murakami, they all got that. The show will definitely be on Netflix in like a year. Oh, Kanye did a bunch of career altering stuff after this? Oh, Takashi Murakami basically got ghosted right after this? Oh, Ye and Cudi hate each other now? Well, damn, gotta love that Yeezy vaporware. Why did this even get announced? This made me mad, it really did. I shouldn't have even expected anything, but if this had actually been worked on, it would have been pretty good. Just look at the teaser alone, it looks great. Imagine what they could have done if somebody like Netflix actually did pick it up. But like I said, it's so vague, and knowing Kanye, if this did happen, it would get cancelled like the moment it aired. So honestly, I do think having a scrap series is a bit better than one that would have ended prematurely. At long last, we can finally talk about some music. Let's go. Wash Us in the Blood would be the first and only single from Kanye's scrapped album God's Country. It was announced on WESTDAYEVER, but the song and the official announcement of the album wouldn't come out until June 30th, alongside a video, which is interesting to say the least. You know, for a song that got pretty decent attention when it came out, it feels so forgotten today. Not like that's a super bad thing. The song is pretty meh, and Kanye's like half asleep on it. By the way, tangent, if you do listen to the song or anything from the Jesus is King era up until Donda and wonder why does Kanye sound so flat on this, it's because he was recording his verses through the iPhone mic for this era. So it sounds noticeably worse than like everything else in his discography, and it's annoying because you don't even have to be an audiophile or anything to hear it. I was like 13 and could tell it sounded horrible. But anyway, Travis Scott is on here. His verse is pretty short, but it does bring up the vibe a little bit. Up until this point, Kanye has kind of been doing nothing on this beat, which is great, by the way. A whole album of this production, man, I wish we got it. Then his last verse, he does try a bit, but it just doesn't hit. You can tell he was going for something hard hitting to actually fit on this beat, but it just doesn't work, sadly. Not only are most of the bars bad, but the iPhone mic strikes again, and he just isn't there enough for it to translate. The song is also mixed kind of bad, so what could have been decent just sounded like muffled yapping. So after this, nothing really happened, not publicly at least. We literally never heard about God's Country again, and a month later, it had already evolved into Donda, which itself would still take a full year to release. So kind of a mess overall. Lastly, the biggest topic from WESTDAYEVER, the one with the most secrecy, and the one with the least information. Jesus is King Dr. Dre version, aka Jesus is King 2. Despite being featured in WESTDAYEVER, this album was actually announced way back in November 2019. Nothing was ever really said about it publicly. In fact, WESTDAYEVER was the last time it was spoken about, so to have proper context about this album, we have to use leaks to fill in every crack. Alright, so the album gets started in November 2019, Kanye goes silent and songs start leaking in early 2020. WESTDAYEVER happens in June. Later on, we would find out that Kanye's mention of it may have intended to announce its release, but that was missed. Fast forwarding to the Donda era, the song Up From the Ashes releases on its deluxe. Obviously, by this point, the album wasn't coming out, but we still really knew nothing of it and why it was cancelled. Eminem's remix of Use This Gospel somehow, someway landed on DJ Khaled's God Did in 2022. This always seemed really strange to me. The one song Kanye didn't keep in the vault, and it's Use This Gospel with Eminem. That might be worse than nothing. But yeah, jumping to now, and it looks like the album would have most likely released around WESTDAYEVER, and after it didn't, it kinda just fell apart, with both Kanye and Dre getting busy in their personal lives, and the album not really having a ton there. The known version of this album that you can find is 10 tracks total, 8 remixes, 2 new, and for something hyped up like a major collab, that's pretty disappointing. So Kanye, probably not being happy with it, tried to push for more work but just lost interest in it after June 2020. Maybe it was because of the 30 different things he was doing that month. And that is it. The full legacy of WESTDAYEVER ends there. Haven't had it or anything similar to it since. Literally everything Kanye has done since 2020 has been so mishandled. There's almost no way to control it, let alone multiple projects to reveal at the same time. So I'm happy that I was able to actually be there and live through the last few years of Kanye being decently productive. But anyway, that's it for this one. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Stay clouded, everyone. See you later.